Well, welcome back to The Pulse. This is another great episode just for you out there. This is Dr. Khalfani, you know who I am. We are glad to see you here, and we have an extraordinary guest today, Dr. Leonard Jeffries. Yes, none other than Dr. Leonard Jeffries. He is right here from in the city of Newark, and not only is he from the city of Newark, but he is a global citizen. And so we're excited to have him here to join us and talk to us today about what's going on in the world. Dr. Jeffries is the founder of the African Studies, Black Studies at the City College in the city of New York. And so right now, join me in welcoming Dr. J. How are you doing? That's how we call you, Dr. J, right?
That's right. And Dr. Khalfani, I'm glad to be here with you and the family here in Newark.
Yes, thank you very much. You know, I'm always amazed at the fact that you're everywhere. Every time I turn around, someone says you're in Brazil or in South America, somewhere else, or in Africa or in the Caribbean. And so, you know, you are the example of the global African traveler today.
And as you say, I got to keep my hands on the pulse of what's really happening in the African world. So no better way than to actually go, see, and connect and then bring back the experience and the message.
Right, exactly. Well, you know, right here in this very studio, we had an intention of having a great leader in our community come and join us, whose position now you sit at. You are now the International President of WADU, the World African Diaspora Union. And, you know, as we are looking at that, and you're the recent president, taking over for Ambassador Dudley Thomas, I want to just ask you really, what is the path forward that you see now for WADU? How is WADU getting ready to do its thing in the world? And what maybe you can even tell our audience, tell them what WADU is about first.
Well, certainly. We can link what WADU is all about, this organization which we've created over the last 10 years, and also what Ambassador Dudley Thompson was all about. And I believe that we could set up a series of presentations that will deal with his great work, which spanned almost 100 years. He died at 95, born 1917 in Panama of Jamaican parents, and then he began his journey, his great and mighty walk. As we referenced Dr. John Henry Clark's life, many of us have really had great and mighty walks, and so we've walked together. And so Dudley Thompson represents that. And so the World African Diaspora Union is another vehicle that we've created, the most recent of the vehicles, to deal with the pulse of the African world and the necessity to form strategic unions and coalitions to accomplish the objective, and the major objective is unity. Operational unity of African peoples is absolutely necessary for us to put meaningfully in place and continue this rise of African peoples. We call it the African Renaissance. So the World African Diaspora Union has as its objective to link black people wherever they are to this process of the rise of African peoples, the birth of new nations, the unity of those nations into regions, the linkage of the regions and the continent together. And now the African Union, which is the latest of the continental formations, is trying to link with its enormous diaspora, black people who are in Europe, black people who are in Canada, the US, in the Caribbean, Central and South America. So there are hundreds of millions of us of African descent outside of the continent that are now being linked to the continent. And I had a chance in the last few weeks to travel throughout the African world and see that linkage really firm itself up and to feel the pulse of it. And it has been one of the greatest moments of my life, and I've had an enormous life experience.
Yes. Now, you were born on the same day as the ambassador. He 95, you 75, and so that when you think about the things that both of you have done, when you say you traveled a lot and you being on the pulse of what's going on here, that pulse for WADU, is there a specific strategy in terms of this operational unity that WADU wants to do? How is WADU, you know, there's lots of Pan-African organizations. Yes. How does WADU differ from all those other organizations?
Well, one of the enormous differences is that now we're dealing with actual nation building and regional building and global building. we've talked about that before, but actually the steps have been put in place for this to actually happen. Ambassador Dudley Thompson and myself, I was the vice president of the organization at that time, and he was the president internationally of our organization. So in April 2010, we went to Senegal for the inauguration of this symbol of the rise of African peoples. This is the statue of the African family rising that was initiated by the president of Senegal, Abdoulaye Wade, and he began to build this statue, and they laid the cornerstone in 2002, and then really the building started 2003, and they inaugurated it 7 years later. It is the most significant symbol that I've ever experienced. It's the rise of the black man, and a powerful black man coming out of a volcanic explosion, and he's holding on to his rock, the black woman, his wife, in his right hand, and in his left hand he's holding their child up to the Creator, and that child is pointing to the future. And the future for this symbol of the rise of the black family is not pointing to Europe, where we usually looked for guidance. It's not pointing east to the new fellows on the block, China and India. It's not pointing south to the rest of Africa. That child is pointing to the Western Hemisphere. And it is the unity of Africans in the Western Hemisphere with the continent which will cement this African Renaissance and put it on a sound footing. And so that's the marvelous thing, that we talked about it, now it's actually happening. When the inauguration took place and there were 200 or 300 leaders from Black America, including Jesse Jackson and Hazel Dukes and Ben, the head of the NAACP, there were 20 plus African leaders who actually signed an agreement inside this statue, our meeting rooms and exhibit space, etc. They signed an agreement to put in place by 2017 a United States of Africa, a continental unity of the 50 plus nations. And what they have understood, particularly over the last 10 years, that linkage of the nations on the continent and welding them together into regions, 5 regions, needs its diaspora, needs the people outside of Africa to link back to Africa. So they've created the concept of a 6th region. So Africans in Europe, Africans in Australia, Africans in India, Africans in North America and South America, Central America and the Caribbean are now targeted to form a 6th region, to bring their knowledge, to bring their wealth, to bring their experience, to bring their strategic place in the global community and link it to the African continent. It is a great moment in our history. And Dudley Thompson's life was a part of that. Dr. John Henry Clark's life was a part of that. And so I'm glad to be continuing the legacy that they gave us.
Right, right. And I think that that's a great point, you know, that this legacy is something that's not new, but that is something that is ongoing.
Yes.
And that you know, we're either at the precipice or we're at a new bridge.
Yes.
And hopefully we're at a new bridge.
Right.
So we're going to be back in just a minute, and we're going to talk more about where we're going to go from here, because we need to look at how we push the envelope and think about how we step over the precipice to create this new bridge.
Yes.
I'm here with Dr. Jeffries, and you're watching The Pulse. And so stay tuned, and we will be back just after this minute.
Hi, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Nicole Malachowski, a U.S. Air Force Fighter Squadron Commander and the first woman pilot with the United States Air Force Aerial Demonstration Team. My fellow airmen and I know that each of us plays a huge part in our victories, whether in the air or on the ground. We couldn't accomplish our mission without using everyone's skills to reach our goals. Embracing our differences and working together is also what has made America strong. Thank you for your support, and remember, our strength lies in our diversity. This message brought to you by the United States Air Force.
She passed away about 6 months ago. It was really hard to learn that there was no cure. So we sought hospice care. The hospice people, they really helped. They made her feel comfortable. And they helped me and the girls, especially the girls. They're helping us get through this loss. Now, hospice people, they're good people. They're really good people.
Welcome back. You are tuned into The Pulse. with Dr. Khalfani and Dr. Leonard Jeffries. Dr. Leonard Jeffries is the president, international president of WADU, the World African Diaspora Union. And we were just talking about how, you know, with WADU, looking at being at this place that in the world that the African community is really at a precipice of whether or not we're going to transform the things in front of us. Is the revolution, not the revolution, but well, really maybe we need a revolution.
Yes, it is.
But is the renaissance that President Wad was talking about, is it going to manifest itself in today's world? I mean, let's look at this for real. You know, we have in all these urban cities, we have very high murder within African American communities. Right. We have collapses of the housing market that is tremendously impacting our community, not just in the United States, but around the world. So how does the work of a WADU, bringing together all these African people, how does that transform? How does that relate to the people on the ground?
Well, very important question, and certainly a very important object. We have to have a unity that serves all of our people. And that's why we can talk about revolutions. There have been several revolutions over the last 500 years when Africans were taken out of Africa with the enslavement process. And that's why I say to our people, you need to know your history and your story and not his history and his story, meaning the European American. You need to have a systems analysis so you can read history and see its movement and developing, get the pulse of history. 500 years ago, when the enslavement process started, in terms of the transatlantic component of it, Africans were pushed out of the human family. And over the next several hundred years, including the founding of this nation, America, Africans were not even considered human, they were considered property. And so we have come with revolutionary activities and transformative processes out of this deep hole of dehumanization. Right. And we have fought to reestablish our humanity. And the revolution of the mind that's going on for the last 50 years has not only established African humanity, but it has established Africans as the chosen people of the human family. As my wife, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, would say, the mothers and fathers of the human family. The latest scientific information and knowledge that has exploded on the world scene has established us as the biogenetic founders of all humanity. So we've come from a position where we weren't even considered human to a position where we were trying to establish our humanity to an understanding now that we are the mothers and fathers of humanity. So that symbol that President Wad had created is such an informative one because you can teach from that. The symbol purposely is 174 feet, taller than the Statue of Liberty that is in the harbor of New York. The symbol is taller than the religious symbol of Jesus the Redeemer overlooking Rio de Janeiro. And that symbol represents the movement of all of the people and centered around the future, which is the children. Most significant monuments are paying tribute to a great leader or war memorials or a religious concept. This is a people's monument. So our mission is the mission of the peoples. And as I'm moving through the world over the last 3 or 4 weeks, for example, I had a chance to spend 2 weeks in South Africa. At the World Parliament, there's an African established continental parliament with representatives from all the African nations. It's based in South Africa, its permanent headquarters. It has an assembly hall which holds a couple thousand people, 5 or 6 language translations, including Swahili, and it represents the whole continent. Now they've opened it up to parliamentarians out of Africa that are in Europe, that are in America, that are in South America and the Caribbean. So the building blocks of putting together a parliamentary process is in place. The meeting of the African minds, the intellectuals, and the key leaders, they have their meetings. The same process was taking place. The intellectuals met, then the civil society met. That's the groups on the ground that take the development down to the people. Then the parliamentarians met. Then the foreign ministers took their work and met, and then the heads of state met. So you have, for 2 weeks, a whole process of Africans putting that system capability. I often talk about systems analysis.
Right.
You have to have an economic component, you have to have a political component, and you have to have a cultural component. That's that pyramid of power. Every system has those things. Economics is your productive, creative capability. Politics is your management capability. And culture represents the values and the mind.
I'm gonna hold you off on your systems analysis a moment, because we're gonna come back to that. And I think it's such an important part of the total story. Now, when we think about your point about what's going on in those meetings that were going on, you know, a lot of times the critics of what's going on with the Pan-African Parliament, the critics of what's going on with the African Union, are the folks who say that, well, that's no different from what happened with the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, which was these heads of state that happened at the end of colonization, and you had the Nkrumahs and Sekou Touré's and all those other folks who pushed that into being. So how would you suggest that if we're going to look at that as a model, and now there's this new model, that it's different from that, and how do we address those criticisms?
Well, it's definitely different. And when you say the question of the pulse, I've been blessed to be able to travel throughout the African world and to test the pulse and to be a part of the pulse and to give that pulse a stimulus. And so I have seen, for example, a bonding of an organization in the United States called the National Conference of Black Mayors, and they're linked to the mayors in the African continent and the Caribbean and Central America. And the fantastic thing is that the leader of this international organization, the National Council of Black Mayors, is Mayor Robert Bowser of East Orange. And so he moves around the world when he finds time from his mayoral responsibilities, and he leads this great organization. I was with him and the organization in Nigeria when they were meeting with the Nigerian leadership, not just the heads of state, but the governors and the local government people who have to deliver services on the ground to the people. And so Mayor Bowser, for example, has a concept that's built into his organization called deliverables. Mm-hmm. How can you deliver to the people the proper housing, the proper water systems, the proper trash removal, the proper school systems, the proper health? And so there are structures at various levels that have been put in place and are now being rejuvenated and given great strength and power that are actually going to have as their mission to deliver the great wealth created globally to the people in their villages and in their small communities.
That's good. I'm glad you said that. See, and as we think about that, that really puts us back into the point of talking about the systems analysis. And so we're going to take a little break, and we're going to come back to talk to Dr. Leonard Jeffries here on The Pulse, and we're going to find out how systems analysis fits into this context. We'll be right back.
114th Infantry Company, Iraq.
The memories are all blurred.
I don't know what's wrong with me.
The words, they're hard to find.
I came back a different person.
I wonder if she's better off without me.
You just feel alone.
You gave all to the cause of freedom. Now it's our turn to give our all to you. It's free and totally confidential. Reach us at operationnotforgotten.com. We are here.
In order to beat breast cancer, I knew I would have to lose my breasts. But to reclaim my life, I chose breast reconstruction.
Each year, nearly 150,000 women will learn they will undergo a mastectomy due to breast cancer. But 7 out of 10 women are never told about their breast reconstruction options. Breast reconstruction is a very important part of the healing process, both physically and emotionally. Download my song Flower to share the message and help us share the fact that women can feel whole again.
Welcome back to The Pulse. This is Dr. Khalfani, and I'm here with my guest, Dr. Leonard Jeffries. And so we were talking about this whole idea, really of the legacy that you give the world, right? What you've given the world in, I think, your role in being involved in WADU, in being involved at City College, and all these different places. On one level, I could boil down to your idea of systems analysis. Because all of those pieces help us to understand how we resolve the dilemmas in our community, how we can get to the youth. And maybe you give a little more about systems analysis, you know, an abbreviated version, but so that we can understand how we can utilize that line of thinking that Dr. J. ism, if we will, to understand what's going on.
Well, that's the important point you just raised. Systems analysis allows us to assess what we need and give a review of what we're capable of, and then putting in place what we have to do. And so that systems analysis is necessary for you to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, you plan to fail. And so we're now talking about planning at all of the levels of development, the local level in the villages, the urban levels, which are major poles of development, linking in the various nations into their regional ecologies and communities, and then linking them globally. So nothing like this has ever happened before. This is the most exciting time of my life. I'm sure Dr. John Henry Clark is sitting up in glory saying, it's moving, it's moving.
Yes, sir.
There's a Pan-African process taking place, and for Dr. Clark, it was Pan-Africanism or perish. And for the other great leaders, it was a question of making this work through the development of an African mind. That's where education, formal and informal education in the families, education in the communities, education in the homes. And that culture speaks to that. So we have to have a culture that doesn't speak to our behind, but speaks to our mind. And so it's the development of the African mind that's going to be key to making the plan work for the whole sweep of our world communities, not just the super rich, not just the most powerful. And see, that's our mission, to have not a bridge to the future, to get over this chasm that we have to leap over. We need a super highway to the future. That hit me so clear when I was in Nigeria, and I saw the ingredients of it, local governors doing great things. And so as we are moving around and getting the pulse of our people, it's actually happening. I just left Trinidad Tobago. I was there for the Emancipation Lecture Series, the Kwame Nkrumah, one of our great revolutionary brothers. They've initiated a lecture series to raise the consciousness of people in Trinidad Tobago. Was most recently in Atlanta with the Conference of Black Mayors that had brought in mayors from all around the world, including Colombia, South America, and Brazil. Brazil now represents 100 million black people in a continent. It is, most of South America is Brazil. So as Brazil joins the African family for the first time in a real dimension, that gives power. You talk about a pulse of an explosion of Africanness into this century that could not have been foreseen.
Right,
and I have traveled and felt it and seen it and know that it is happening.
I think that clearly that when the Africans in Brazil, in Colombia, in Peru, in Panama, and all these places, and the Belize, all these different places, in the islands, and in the North America, and once we all begin to make that connection, then we transform the world.
That's right.
That's the key, right?
And that's the legacy of Dudley Thompson. He represented the link from the 1917 when he was born, because 1915, when Dr. Clark was born, was the time that the Birth of the Nation movie was produced by so-called Hollywood. And that Birth of the Nation movie was a rewriting history. Instead of showing Africans enslaved busting out of slavery and setting this nation on a new course, they created a movie phenomena that worshiped the Ku Klux Klan and was trying to push the black struggle and victory back. But at the same time, that triumph was manifest in white supremacy. Dr. Clark was being born. And the year before him, my mother, who put the Pan-African consciousness in me, was being born. 1914, Dr. Clark, 1915. 1916, Marcus Garvey is leaving Jamaica to join Booker T. Washington in America to pull people together. 1917, Dudley Thompson is born. And from that point on, it has been a triumph and a great victory over the tribulations of our people, setting in place this Pan-African path of greatness, tapping into our knowledge and understanding of self, tapping into the world knowledge, because we brought forth the world knowledge. When we talk about systems, economics, that's a science we developed. When we talk about politics, that's a science we developed. When we talk about culture, that's a science we developed to link the human family to the divine processes. And so we have to see who and what we are. We are truly the chosen people. Other people have taken that mantle, but we are it in reference to science and history. That intellectual warfare that we've engaged in has been a victory for African peoples.
And I'm going to have to stop you there. Unfortunately, we were running out of time, Dr. J.
I'll be back.
Yes,
this is
yes,
my
yes.
home. I'll be back.
We will definitely have you back. We are honored to have you here. Let me just first of all say
brother.
thank you, Dr.
All right.
J.
That's that pulse that
yes,
we are
indeed.
talking about. We
Yes,
got to
indeed.
embrace each other, and we've got to bond and build.
Yes. And so I want to thank you for joining us here. This has been a wonderful opportunity for us to have a conversation with Dr. Leonard Jeffries here on The Pulse. The Pulse is the place where we're on the touch, the pulse of what's going on in the African diaspora community, wherever in the world that you are. I'm Dr. Khalfani, and I'll see you next time. Thank you very much.